Be careful, you may be when you've been told your word on.
Yeah, we've had a couple of political flops like that. All right, am I on? I'm on. All right, as I was just telling everybody, starting next week, we're going to do a study of David. We have some books here. If you're going to participate, I'll make sure that you get it. If you're online and you can't be here, if you'll let me know or somebody, we can get you a copy of this so you can have it at home. All right, first thing, let's turn to Numbers chapter 33. Today is a lesson that we prepared a couple weeks ago that we kind of got put on hold because of the virus situation in the neighborhood and in the church here. So it's basically the conclusion of our study of the Book of Numbers, which means in the wilderness. So today we're going to take a look at the last part of Numbers and kind of wrap it up from there as we move into a study of David for next week. Okay, first thing, chapter 33, starting in verse 50. It says, "On the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho, the Lord said to Moses, 'Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into Canaan, drive out all the inhabitants of the land before you. Destroy all their carved images, their cast idols, and demolish in all their high places. Take possession of the land and settle in it, for I have given you the land to possess.'" Verse 55, "But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land, those who you allow to remain will become barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides. They'll give you trouble in the land where you will live, and then I will do to you what I plan to do to them." Let me turn this down. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to study your word. Help us and guide us and apply it into our lives. In your son's name, amen. All right, a few weeks ago when we were last in here, we were in what I call part one of final details. We looked at some things that Moses was told to kind of wrap up before he handed his power completely over to Joshua and before they moved into the invasion of Canaan. First thing he told them was take vengeance on the Midianites. You remember why? What did the Midianites do? More than didn't. Well, they kind of welcomed them, but it wasn't the right kind of welcome. They seduced them and caused them to turn to other gods, which was basically Balaam's way of going around the cursings and the blessings that Balak was trying to get him to do, the king of Moab. So the Midianite women did this, and so they were told to take vengeance on the Midianites. Moses was told to do this before they finished everything up and prepared for the invasion. So he took 1,000 men from each tribe, plus he took Phinehas with some articles of the sanctuary. Now Phinehas was high priest's son. Yeah, the high priest is son, so it's Aaron's grandson. But he's will be heir apparent, if you will, or whatever. He's the one that during the Midianite seduction actually honored God by standing up for him in the midst of all that and killing some folks or whatever that were caught in the act of adultery. All right, so he's to take some articles from the sanctuary, some holy articles, 1,000 men from each tribe. That's 12,000 men. We've already decided, had a census. Their army is 600,000 plus. So they only took a small portion. They went and they killed every man of the Midianites and burned all the towns and their camps. Keep in mind, actually we can see it here, their camps and everything, they were out in the desert. A lot of their places they lived were out here. And so a lot of them were camps, not full-time towns, if you will. There were places they stopped. Killed all the men, burned all the towns, all the camps, took all their herds, their flocks, and all their goods as plunder. Moses was angry because who did they not kill? The women. And he said, they're the ones that started this. You know, they're the ones that was guilty. So he told them to kill all the women who had slept with the men and all the boys. So the only thing that was left was young girls, which was taken as plunder. The spoils were divided in half between the soldiers that fought, the 12,000 men, who incidentally didn't lose a single man. And because of that, they gave a special tribute to God because of the fact that God had protected them. But they divided the spoils between those 12,000 men and the rest of the community. The half that was given to the soldiers, they were required to give one of every 500 to Eleazar, which is the high priest now, and to his family. And of the tribute that was given to the Lord by the community, which of their half, they were to give one of every 50 to the Levitical tribe as a whole. So basically, they go in, they take a force, they obliterate the people, they burn down and conquer all the towns and villages, they take the plunder, they wipe out the people, they provide a tribute to God, a thanksgiving for what he's done for them, and they've gone through all this. And one of the things I pointed out, that this was a mini exercise as to what would happen with the 600,000 people as they marched across the Jordan and started taking the land. It was kind of a preparation, if you will, to see, first of all, these are your enemies, and here's what you do, and how you end up with, take their possessions and end up in what you're supposed to do and how you're to give tribute to God. So it was a complete exercise in what to do. They've had plenty of exercises in what not to do. So this was a good training for them as they were about to cross the Jordan. We also saw how Reuben and Gad, the tribes of them, got together and said, man, we like this land on this side of the river. Why do we have to go across the river? Let's just take this. So they appeal to Moses, and Moses jumps on them. He was pretty upset about it. And he says, look, you guys are such a discouragement that God is going to, God's already threatened to wipe this community out multiple times. Now he's really going to do it, because you won't even go into the land that he has chosen for you. And so they back up a second. They said, well, what if we go, and that's this area right here. What if we go up and down to these towns, and we settle them, and we put some protections in place for our women and our children, and then we go and fight, and we promise to cross the Jordan with all of our brothers and fight until the time that the land is subdued. And Moses said, that'll work. So we find that because of that, they were given permission. The tribe of Reuben, Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh was given permission to go and to take these towns, which they'd already conquered, and go into these towns and set up housekeeping basically with their families and provide fences and whatever they needed to protect from the animals and such. And then they came back ready to fight the battle. So this took place last week in our last discussion. That brings us to chapter 33. We've touched on chapter 33 multiple times because it is, and starts off by talking about the stages in the journey of the Israelites. We've pointed out that God told Moses to give an accurate accounting. It's a detailed camp by camp listing of where they started, starting in Egypt all the way out. Actually, it didn't start in Egypt. Yeah, it did. Ramses. Started in Egypt, from there all the way to the point to where they were currently, which is in the plains of Moab, which is this right here. And so they detailed it out step by step. Started off with, they set out from Ramses on the 15th day of the first month, what that would become their first month. Then they passed through the sea into the desert of Sinai. Basically, on the second month of the second year is when they left Sinai. So they were there a little over a year, or a little less than a year, but from the time they left Egypt, it was a little over a year. They left Sinai and went on their journey to Kadesh. Kadesh is, as we've discussed, somewhere in this area right here. There's multiple locations, but it's probably right in here somewhere. And from there, they sent out spies to launch the invasion, which never happened because of the incidents that took place. And then it goes on to say that they left Kadesh for Mount Or in the 40th year, the 5th month, the first day. So in the 40th year, the middle of the 40th year, They leave Kadesh, and it says that they set out to Mount Or, which is right in this area. Well, excuse me. Got to get down farther. I said Kadesh is here. It's down here south of Beersheba. It's right in here. I forgot my map's down lower. And they set out to Mount Or, which is right in this area right here somewhere. Nobody knows exactly which mount was Mount Or. And from there, we find that it says that Aaron dies in the 40th year. He was 123 years old. Then they traveled around Edom, which means they went down south here and then came back up because of the instance we studied there, and came into the plains of Moab. So they went down here, came back up here, through here, across the Jabbok, the Anon, I can't remember. I got all these names I don't remember. It's not the Tennessee, so I can't remember it. Sorry. But anyway, this river, they crossed it, and then they come over here to the plains of Moab across from Jericho, and that's where they're camped. And that's all detailed out throughout this entire chapter. And on the plains of Moab, they're told, as we read, Moses was told to speak to them. This is where we believe that's where the book of Numbers was done, right there. After they arrived, he starts detailing out. Now, you remember when. And as we've gone through this, we've gone through it. He's here, and we're getting ready for the invasion. He's getting ready to step out of the picture, and he's saying, basically refreshing their memory, bringing them right up to date. And then he goes on to say what we read today. When you cross the Jordan, what are you supposed to do with the inhabitants? Drive them out. All of them are part of them. All of them. We're going to learn, well, we learned in Joshua when we studied it, and if you ever read Judges, they didn't do a good job of that. And he goes on to say what's going to happen. So drive them out and destroy all the images, idols, high places, anything related to worship to someone besides the God of Jacob. Remember, this whole study started when we studied Exodus and in Numbers with the God of Abraham, the God of Jacob, God of Israel, Yahweh. And he says, get rid of anything that you can worship that's not Yahweh. P.S. You just got in trouble for doing that. Don't forget. Take possession of the land, settle it as your inheritance because I'm giving it to you. But if you don't, then I'm going to do to you what I planned for them. What did he plan for them? Destroy them. The Canaanites and all the people of the land, he had promised their time was up. It was time to destroy them. And that's what he would do to Jacob's children if they didn't do that. All right, so as we get to... Do what? Yeah, I think it's way past that, but yeah. All right, so here they do this. That's the basic chain of events in this chapter 33 that kind of goes through it. Then after that, he spends some time in chapters 34 through 36, and he talks about land allotment. In chapter 34, if we go to it, he says, the Lord said to Moses, command the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the Canaan, the land that you'll be allotted to you as an inheritance will have these boundaries. And he starts detailing some boundaries. What I'm going to do is try to give them to you generically, because half these places, or more than half these places, nobody knows for sure. But one thing they do know is on the south, it starts at the Salt Sea, and it goes to the Great Sea. And as it does, it goes south through the, what's that place called? Not the Negev, which is included in that, but Zin. The desert of Zin, which is all this area down through here. So it goes down like this through here and south of Kadesh, because it includes Kadesh. So it's down through here somewhere would be your southern border. The western border is, anybody got a guess? Water. The Great Sea. It would be through here. All right, that was the easiest one to define. All the rest of them I had trouble with. I don't know why that was so easy. Then it says if you go from the coast of the Great Sea to a place called Hazar Enan. All we know is it's up here somewhere from here over here somewhere, because we know that on the Transjordan, they were given from down here, from the Arnon, all the way to Mount Hermon, which is right here. We also know that that northern border came across, and then when it comes south, it says it comes on the east side of the Sea of Gennesaret, or Sea of Galilee. That's what it was called in Jesus' time. During this time, it's Gennesaret. Actually, it's Tiberias also during Jesus' time, because they renamed it after Caesar, the boss man. So they gave tribute to him, and they actually built a town there. Anyway, so when it says the eastern border, it's not talking about the Transjordan. It's talking about the original inheritance that they are now getting. It goes down the eastern side of the sea on the hills of, I think it calls it, of the Sea of Gennesaret. So we know it comes down like right through here somewhere. And then down the Jordan River all the way to the Great Sea. No, not the Great Sea. Salt Sea. Dead Sea. What they call the Salt Sea. All right? So basically, we see that this area right here was the land of the inheritance that they were promised. In addition to that, they were given this to the east of Jordan, which we've already discussed, to 1.5 tribes. 9.5 stayed over here. 1.5 got this, and we're able to go back to it later on the eastern shore. I guess it wasn't called the eastern shore. Transjordan, east of Israel, however you want to call it, east of the Jordan River. It's called numerous ways in the Bible. All right. In addition to that, chapter 35 says within this, we have our 12 tribes, our 12 territories. But the tribe of Levi was excluded from getting a territory because they were dedicated to God. But they had to live somewhere. Did they all live in the sanctuary? Oh. So where do they live? In the pastures? Well, they had a pasture, but they didn't have to sleep in it. They were given 48 cities scattered throughout the territory from which they were to serve God. So, for example, in Judah, there would be multiple towns in here, which would be places that were given specifically to the Levites as a religious town. It was just a small town. They were given that, and they were given 3,000 feet, a perimeter, basically of 3,000 feet all the way around the town, outside of the town, in order to pasture the livestock and everything that they received or whatever. So they would take care of it. So they had these 48 cities, and that would be what they would basically live and work. And so if somebody wanted to study or do something, they would go and talk to the people of God that were leading, supposed to be teaching them and leading them. That's where you would go. All right. Within those 48 cities, 6 of them were given a special purpose. Cities of refuge. What's a city of refuge? Is that where all the garbage is piled up? Oh, that's refuge. Okay, this is refuge. Refugees. Do what?
It seems like it's the cities that were making the difference between an absolute murderer and somebody who
There you go.
may have taken someone's life accidentally.
Right. There was basically, God defined in the law the difference between murder and manslaughter. And here he details it out again as he goes through it so they would understand that if you murdered somebody, you didn't get to go to a town of refuge. But if you were a manslaughterer, you killed somebody accidentally and were held responsible, you could go to that town to keep from an eye and a tooth for a tooth being enforced. And God would protect you because it was an accident. But they were required to stay in those 6 towns, wherever they were, and they were scattered throughout the entire place. And if they left them, what could happen? They could be killed. They were considered guilty as a murderer, and the family who could seek retribution and have them killed. And it would not be held against them. So basically, this is the way God set up a way for someone who accidentally kills somebody, non-intentional, and then goes through and provides a way to protect them in that situation. Self-imposed exile, that's right. And if you think about it today, in our legal system, is very similar. If someone commits manslaughter, he is not considered innocent. He's considered guilty. He's just not considered guilty of premeditated murder, which is would be the death penalty or any other situations or whatever that the law would allow. Instead, it was a shorter type of thing, and it's basically you pay for the penalty because you took somebody's life, but it was unintentional, so it wasn't about taking yours. The other thing that takes place, if you read through this, it's very interesting. Our laws are very similar in the fact that if you kill somebody and you have a rock in your hand, you're walking around with a rock in your hand and something happens and you kill somebody, you can't say, well, I was upset and I just didn't think about it and I accidentally hit him with a rock. If it was in your hand, it's considered premeditated. Same thing goes in our system, or supposed to pretty much, as if, they consider that the fact that you're carrying the weapon to the fight and then you accidentally kill him even though you really had no intent. The intent is there because you brought a weapon to the fight, basically. And that's what they say. If you read through that, it talks about rock or a stone or wood or all these different things. If you bring something and you get in a fight or something happens and you're carrying a weapon, then you're guilty of murder because you brought the weapon or whatever to use there. If you got in a fight and was wrestling around and fighting with somebody and they fell and hit their head on a rock, that would be manslaughter. But if you were carrying a rock in your hand and you were swinging and hitting, and then you didn't mean to kill him, but you just thought you'd knock him out, doesn't matter. Anyway, that's just a side issue. That's not really what Moses is concentrating on here. What he's really trying to say is we're dividing up the land. And in that land, the Levites have 48 towns, of which 6 of them are places of refuge. And he reflects back on what he's already taught them in Exodus and the laws.
And they have to stay there until the death of the
high priest. That's right. There is I forgot about that. There is a way to leave the city of refuge, and that is when the high priest dies. So in this case, if it was today, that day, Eleazar was the high priest. As long as he remained alive, he'd stay there. But if he died and his son stepped up, then it erased all of those and it started over.
Like that would be kind of dangerous.
For the high priest. That's true. Family, friends, and Eleazar is always looking over his shoulder.
It also has another thing that's been brought down, and that's basically a trial by jury.
Yeah.
It was a congregation.
Yeah, it was the community. Yeah, and the elders of the community is the ones that actually did. And even in Jesus' time, that's what the elders of the land did. They sat outside the city gates to render judgments. Okay. All right. So we go on, and we get to chapter 35, chapter 36, which is the last chapter. Last chapter, mine's titled The Inheritance of this dude's daughters. We've already talked about them once. He didn't have any sons. Therefore, they were given an inheritance. Well, it was brought up while they were discussing this inheritance. There's a problem with them having an inheritance. Since I don't remember, which tribe were they in? Does anybody remember? Ephraim, I think. No, Manasseh, the brother. They're a tribe of Manasseh. And so there was a problem because if those girls fell in love with somebody over here from Naphtali and married them, then that guy would now take over the land, the property of the wife over here in Manasseh. And so that was pointed out, and Moses clarifies that and says, no, if a woman inherits their father's property because there is no son, then she is required to marry within the tribe so that the land stays within the tribe. And it says there will be no swapping back and forth from tribe to tribe of the land. It all stays in the original tribe and cannot be moved from one place to another. Okay? So he kind of cleans up some issues there that were just little technical legal issues, and he clears that up. And that's where Numbers ends. But I don't want us to end there. I want us to look at a little bit more than that, because there's more writings about this, as I pointed out before. In Deuteronomy Chapters 1 through 4, we have a quick synopsis of all this. Now, Moses was told to tell the people and to write this down, all that had taken place. So as he's sitting here across the river from Jordan, he writes the Book of Deuteronomy. But before we get there, let me back up. Jump too fast. While in the wilderness, this 40-year period, we find that Moses writes a book called Genesis. Anybody heard of Genesis? Why is it important? What is Genesis about? Beginnings. Okay, because that's the way we put it. But in reality, Moses is writing it in order to tell them what? History of their people. That's what he's really trying to do. He does go back to the very beginning, to Adam, and he goes through and he starts talking about it. Let me go to a different page now. And he starts talking to them about it. And in Genesis, he starts by telling them how Abraham came in, and then Noah, and the flood. And in the flood, he had 3 sons. And of the 3 sons, he had one named Shem. That's right. Yeah. Which would become the father, grandfather, whatever, that would actually be, and we don't have it here, but over in modern day Babylon, no, not modern day Babylon, modern day Iraq and Iran, over in that area. In that particular area, they had built a tower. That tower was built, and then all the families that came out of the flood were dissipated and were sent all over the earth. And as they left, Shem was right in that area, some of his descendants, including Abraham's father. We find that Abraham's father goes straight to there. And we've talked about this in other classes, how God selects a remnant. He always keeps a remnant. And that's how it started off. And that's what Moses is trying to detail out, starting with Abraham. God has been with somebody all the way through this journey to bring them to the point where they're at today, sitting right here on this side of the Jordan River. Okay? So as he details this out, he details out how they came to be with the God of Jacob, Yahweh. How Yahweh created and did all these things, bringing it to a guy named Abraham, who was the son of... Huh? That's his brother. They lived in Ur. I forgot to look it up. They were in Ur of Chaldees. That's where they were, which is basically over around Baghdad today. Neighbor was his brother. I'm trying to think what it'll come to me in a minute. Probably come to all of us in a minute. That's the way it is when you don't study. But anyway, in essence, we find that he is taken there. His father, Terah, his father, I told you I'd think of it eventually. Terah takes him to a place called Hera, I think, which is in modern-day Syria, up past Damascus, northeast of Damascus, if you know where any of that is in modern day, which on this map, I've turned this looking from the east. So those of you that think north is up, today west is up. Okay? So if you're confused, you'll have to turn your head. I did this because the land is longer from north to south, and I've got a landscape. So basically, they're over here. Here's Damascus. They're over here. They come up here. Terah takes his son, Abram, and his other son, Nahor, and brings them up here. And while they're in this land, the father dies, and Abraham is given a promise. What is the promise? Yahweh tells him, I will make you a great nation. All right? Once again, so he takes this guy named Abraham, and Abraham leaves his family and takes everything and heads south. He goes over to here. Here's the Sea of Galilee. And he comes in here, and he comes right in here to a town called Shechem. At Shechem, God reiterates his promise to him. He puts up a altar, and God tells him, "This is your land. But it's not yours yet, because the time is not right." So he puts up an altar. We find that he goes a little farther south and sets up another one at Bethel, or right next to Bethel, between Bethel and Ai, which is right here just north of the Dead Sea, north of Jerusalem, in this area. And then after that, we find that he goes from there, and he goes down here around Beersheba, Hebron, into the place called the Negev, which is southern Israel. So he lives in that southern Israel. He resides there for a long time. They have a famine. You remember what happens when the famine happens? What did Jacob do when there was a famine? Went to Egypt. See all that green right there? They had food. So we find that Abram himself heads over here and goes to Egypt and spends some time in Egypt in contact with Pharaoh. Matter of fact, he gets in some trouble with Pharaoh because of his hiding the fact that he was married to his wife. And then he comes back and lives here. And then basically Abraham and his family live here. This is where Isaac is born. This is where Ishmael is born. This is where Keturah's children are born. All this takes place, and so now we have he and his children are all born in this area. And we find, you remember Ishmael? Who was he? It was his first son by Hagar, the maid. All right? He sends him out into the wilderness. You know where he moves to? Right here, to a place called east of Egypt, Shur. So here we find Ishmaelites grow into a people right in this area. In addition to that, he has a son several sons, one of them named Midian. Midian is by Keturah, his third wife, after his Sarah dies, or second wife, I guess. After she dies, has some other children, and his children, the Midians, are the father of the Midianites who come out into this desert to live. Okay, we keep running across these people all through Numbers. All this is taking place in Genesis. As he goes through, in addition to that, he has a son named Isaac, and Isaac has two sons named Jacob and Esau. Jacob is the favored one by God as well as by his wife. Esau becomes a great nation too, and he becomes the community of Edom. And he takes up this area right here in the mountains south of the Great Sea. Jacob, on the other hand, is still here, and he gets paranoid, so he runs all the way back here to the old family. Oh, I forgot one. While Abram is here, he also has a nephew. I think it was Nabor's son. Okay, a nephew named Lot. Lot picks the nice watered land right over here, Sodom and Gomorrah, and you know what happens to him. But he has, his wife gets killed because she looks back, remember all that. And his daughters, he didn't have any sons, so he had some daughters, and what did they do? They got him drunk, and one night, one of them slept with him, and another night, the other slept with him. And both of them had his son and grandson. Depends on how you want to look at it, because it was his daughter's children, but it was also his. One of them was a guy named Moab, who took up here. Another one was named Ammon, who took up residence here. Remember, both of them a lot like this side of the Dead Sea? All right, so they took up residence here. Now, this land was populated by Canaanites and Philistines, which was a descendant of another tribes that come from the sea and from here and all these different people. Now, all of a sudden, the whole land is being infiltrated with Abram's descendants. Jacob goes up here, he comes back, he moves in and lives in this area here once again, and then they have a drought. That's where Genesis takes us and sends Joseph down here into into Egypt. Incidentally, you remember who took him there? The Ishmaelites and the Midianites. his cousins. Okay? Abraham's children's descendants took Joseph, which was Jacob's descendants, and took him and sold him into slavery. That's where Exodus takes up. Next thing we know, he writes a book about Exodus. Tells them while you're over here at Mount Sinai, he talks about how they all that happened in Egypt and what God did to bring them out, and over here to Mount Sinai. That's what Exodus is all about, getting out. All right? Then he writes a book called Numbers. And he's dictating it from over here. He's talking about Numbers and how their journey up here came, and they didn't take the land, and they came back, and then finally they got to here and how they got there. That's the book of Numbers that we just gone through. And the last thing he writes is the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is basically a recap of what they did and the law. Okay? So in the first 4 chapters, we see a quick synopsis of him going without getting into the details. And then he goes on and starts talking about the law that God has handed down. That's why a lot of times we call Deuteronomy the recounting of the law or a duplication or whatever. That's why when you look for the law, you see it in Exodus and in Deuteronomy a lot. Leviticus. I skipped Leviticus. He had already wrote Leviticus because it's the one that gives the law that was given to him at Sinai. All right, so he writes those 5 books in his lifetime as he makes this in this 40-year time in the wilderness. As he does that, we get to the Numbers. And in Numbers, chapter 3, verse 21, he tells us, we're at Deuteronomy. I want to finish in Deuteronomy. Chapter 3, verse 21, and at that time I commanded Joshua, you have seen with your own eyes all that the Lord your God has done to these 2 kings. The Lord will do the same to all the kingdoms over there where you're going. Don't be afraid of them. The Lord your God himself will fight for you. And at that time I pleaded with the Lord. This is Moses. I pleaded with the Lord, sovereign Lord. You've begun to show your servant your greatness, your strong hand, for what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do the deeds and the mighty works that you do? Let me go over and see the good land beyond Jordan and that fine hill country in Lebanon. But because of you, here he is talking to those Israelites. Of course, it's their children and grandchildren. The Lord was angry with me and would not listen to me. That is enough, he said. Do not speak to me any more about this matter. Go up to the top of Pisgah and look west and north and south and east. Look at the land with your own eyes, since you're not going to cross this Jordan. So he tells them this because he was angry. Remember why God was angry with him? Struck the rock and took the credit for it. More for taking the credit than striking the rock. He didn't hold God as holy, and that was how he didn't do it. But yeah, that was the exact charge. You didn't trust me enough and hold me as holy. One verse says you didn't trust me enough, which means you didn't put your faith in me. You did it yourself and took credit. And you did it yourself. And the other verse talks about it. It says you didn't treat me as holy, which means you took the credit. So between those 2 things, God held him accountable. His greatest servant, he held him accountable. All right.
I think it's funny, that how many times in the books that Moses brings up to the children of Israel that
You
made me do that, and it's your fault, and it's several times, just over and over and over, and then here's the end when he's talking to God. He said, "Look what they made me do," and he said, "Stop! I've heard enough of that."
Yeah. Yep.
Now go up on the mountain and die.
Yep.
With him and all the people of Deuteronomy book, obedience brings blessings and disobedience brings punishment.
Yep. Faith and obedience, faith and obedience, faith and obedience, faith and obedience. You can't have it. And if you don't do that, have faith and obedience, it's not gonna be there. All right, last thing I want to read, and we will finish with this reading, is chapter 34 of Deuteronomy. I'll start with verse 1. It says, And then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah, across from Jericho. There the Lord showed him the whole land from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negev and the whole region of the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. Maybe that'll do something. All right. Oh, I'm in chapter 34 of Deuteronomy. Very last chapter of Deuteronomy, his very last writing and actually he didn't write this, somebody else did. Because it says he climbed Mount Nebo and did that, and from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali. Let's see, go down to verse 4. And then the Lord said to him, this is the land I promised to you. Yeah, that's not it. All right, we'll stick with this. This is the land I promised to you on an oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I've let you see it with your own eyes, but you will not cross over into it. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried him in Moab in the valley opposite of Beth Peor. But to this day, no one knows where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days until the time of weeping and mourning was over. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid hands on him. And so the Israelites listened to him and did what the Lord had commanded Moses. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all those miraculous signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his officials and to his whole land. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. And that's where Moses ends. All right. Next week, we're going to take a look at, start our study on David and go from there. Thank you.